G'day and welcome back to Marriage and Mental Illness. I'm Mark. This is my beautiful wife, Merey. How's it going?
Okay.
We're having a good day.
I am a lazy one.
Bit of a, and you haven't been feeling well today
No,
either,
I haven't been
so.
feeling 100% today. And no, it's not COVID. I'm just tired.
We've all got long COVID. Even if we didn't catch COVID, we've all got long COVID, I think.
Even if you don't even have the symptoms to COVID, it must be COVID.
Must be long COVID. So we're doing things a little bit in reverse. Normally what we do is we comment on a podcast that I've already done with STP Shattered the Podcast. I'll put the details up there so you can find it. But today we're anticipating a talk that I'm going to be doing tomorrow in our regular podcast, which is about identity and mental illness. What exactly am I talking about here? It's that I am not my mental illness. I do not identify as my diagnosis. And it seems that we're in a world at the moment where everybody needs to identify as something. If you're not an alphabet person, you're an Indigenous person. If you're not an Indigenous person, you're a religious person. If you're not a religious person, it just seems to go on that everybody seems to want to clarify and classify who they are at the moment. And one of the biggest traps that I feel people living in the environment of mental illness is remembering that they are not that mental illness.
And also to let people know that the person living with you, the person who loves you, they're not defined by your mental illness either.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because when we think about mental illness and identity, I kind of feel like I understand what it means. I have complex PTSD. I've lived with severe depression, severe anxiety, but I am not severe depression or severe anxiety. I'm just Mark. But why would you as a carer feel that you can start to identify as identifying with my mental illness? How does that work?
The way that I see it is along the lines of, because the person with the mental health issues can tend to take center stage, and also it can tend to consume a day, it can consume weeks.
I see.
And what I'm saying is their mental health or their mental health issues don't define you either, and don't define your life and what you can and can't do, because you can feel like you can't do anything because you're there to support and to care for them. And also perhaps they're going through what have you often called it? A mental health crisis? Is that what you've, yeah. And if they are going through a crisis, it's not as though you're going to invite a whole bunch of people over to come and hang out at your house. You tend to change how things go. You change what you do with your kids, whether you go out or whether you stay and so on. But that doesn't define who I am either. That doesn't, I'm still Merey, I'm still me. And there will be circumstances where it dictates what you can and can't do, but it doesn't define either of us as people.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it from a carer's perspective, because obviously my attitude has changed in that now that I'm learning what it's like to be a carer with our kids, two of our kids. So I think, I don't know. I feel like I must be confident in who I am as a person, that I don't identify as the father of mentally ill children. Is that what you're talking about? Being the wife of a mental person.
It's so mental.
And I can say that because I got a note from my doctor.
It's just saying your life doesn't need to be completely consumed by it because the person in your life is suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
you have to still want and desire some things for yourself as well, which can take a major back seat when you have a person in your life who's suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think are some of the dangers from a carer of the person that you're caring for? What do you think some of the dangers are for the person with a mental illness in losing their identity in their illness?
I think the danger is they don't see the person who they are anymore. They only see the mental illness.
Yeah. And maybe can't see past it? Is that what you're saying?
In many circumstances, yes. And I think if they're in the middle of a crisis, that is all they can see.
Oh.
That is to them, their identity is the suffering and the mental anguish that they're experiencing.
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's what I think.
Well, it's a weird thing, and I equate it to I was speaking to a mate of mine once, and we were talking about the alphabet people, and he said, I was almost gay. And that struck me as a really, really odd statement. And I said, well, what do you mean by you were almost gay? Now married, got a couple of kids. And he said for 2 years, he flirted with the idea of homosexuality. It appealed to him. It seemed easy. And he said he only ever dipped his toes in to the water. And I said, well, why not? Do you now call yourself bisexual? He said, no, I'm heterosexual. He said the difference was that when it came time to say, are you gay or not? To him, it felt like a decision, and he was defining who he was. Why this equates to mental illness, and please, I don't equate being gay, trans, whatever, with being mentally ill. Please don't think what I'm talking about is the danger I think a person has when they have a mental illness is to adopt it as their persona, is to be so overwhelmed by their diagnosis, by their situation, that they become their mental illness. In many ways, and I'm interested to hear what you think, I equate that to victimhood. If I suddenly start professing that I am something, I feel like I'm taking on a lifestyle. So by saying that publicly, that I have a mental illness, I feel like I am now identified with that group of people. And I don't necessarily want is that when you start to identify with uh, a mindset, it's tempting to become that mindset. So take some celebrities. As soon as they identify that they become a part of a group, they're indigenous, they're LGBTQ, they're WXY, they're Muslim, they're whatever, it's suddenly like they become a spokesperson for that community. Magda Zabansky said it well. When she came out of the closet, she said, I now feel like I'm a professional gay. Because whenever somebody wanted to talk about alphabet issues, they pulled her out. And I guess that's what I was afraid of by standing up and saying that I live with a mental illness, that people would start equating me with that stigma.
Mm-hmm. I do think that there is a stigma there. And for an example, I would never say to let, if you're applying for a job, to let them know that you have mental health issues.
Yeah, you've actually said that a couple of times.
I would not do that.
Tell me why.
Because I think people have this idea that if someone has mental health issues, that they're going to have to take a lot of time off.
They're
going
unreliable.
They're going to be difficult, inconsistent, hard to work with. Now that's a stereotype. That's not necessarily true because there's different types of mental health issues. They're not all the same, and they vary in complexity of it as well. But if you put that as part of your CV or into a cover letter of some sort, or even as part of an interview, I think that it would actually mark against you. Of course, no one would openly say that we didn't hire you because you have a mental health issue. There's no way they would do that.
But you think there'd be a bias against it,
Absolutely.
unconscious or not,
Absolutely.
that, okay, I like what you said, that this person would be difficult, unreliable. You said a bunch of words there. I'm actually going to have to listen to this again before I do my chat about it tomorrow, because you said some interesting words there. It is difficult. It's like when we first started hiring people with disabilities actively in the community. And as a person that worked in the disability field for a number of years, endeavoring to get people with disabilities into open employment, it was really difficult until workplaces saw it as a badge of honor that they were inclusive. Can we include mental illness now as potentially being part of that? People taking pride in the fact that they provide a safe place for people who have a mental illness.
I think there's some organisations that already do that,
Yeah.
and there wouldn't be an organisation that would ever come out and say that they don't support people and, give you that work-life balance and so on. But some people do have significant mental health issues that impact them on a daily basis to be able to work. Now, sometimes that impacts them and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
To an employer, it's not that they're trying to be necessarily insensitive. They're just trying to get the work done.
Yeah. I know that you had a situation in your workplace where you were overseeing people who struggled with mental illness. And I know that the struggle for you was, where does the boss begin and the friend end? Because it's starting to become one of my favorite sayings: friends can't fix friends. Friends can love friends, friends can support friends, friends can be an advocate. But unless you're a professional psychologist, counselor, whatever, friends can't fix friends. And you shouldn't try. If your best friend is a person with a mental illness, you wouldn't then start offering them professional counseling, because you lose that objectivity that a friend has. But I know that you've struggled with that. At what time am I caring for the person and being supportive and understanding? And at what point am I being a carer for the person?
I don't think
It's
I think it's about just showing empathy, but at the end of the day, you've got a job to do. And
Yeah.
they have a job to do. And that's why we all get paid money, is to come in and do this job.
Mm.
That being said, I think if people are struggling and they can't be at the workplace, then don't be at the workplace. Some people say back to me, well, that's easier said than done. I get paid for when I'm actually there, not when I'm not there and I don't have all the benefits.
Yeah.
But it's that all then just comes back to, do you see someone? Do you on your medication? Do you put in strategies and so on? But I think it's a really, really difficult thing.
Yeah.
It is hard to exist working with people at the best of times when you are struggling with mental health issues. I've actually been in situations with people in multiple groups, and those people have mental health issues, and that can vary from anxiety to depression to all sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do a practical example. I lost a job that I loved, that I called the best job that I've ever had. And I was really crumbling in that job. I don't want to mention it. You know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And even today, I still feel the ripple effects of that, the crushed dreams, the hopes that I had. You were able to look at that from the point of view of an advocate. And tell me if I'm wrong. I'm going to make a statement and you can say it's a wrong statement. I truly don't think that the employer understood my mental situation.
No.
I don't
But
think they got it at
I
all.
don't think a lot of employers would understand the situation.
But how do we get past that then? How do we? Because if somebody came to work and said, "I've got Alzheimer's disease," we're not going to fire them. We're going to have to transition them into a different type of working. So why is it that mental illness can't be dealt with in the same way? Is it stigma? Is it that we're not equipped? Is it that we're just not far enough into understanding?
I think it's all of the above.
Right.
But also, given the fact that sometimes people don't feel like they can be open about what they're struggling with, how they're struggling, and what they can and can't do when they are suffering with mental health issues. Now, that often happens. And at the end of the day, like I just said, you are being paid to do a job.
Yep.
If you cannot do that job, then you're going to have to open some sort of conversation about it.
Yep.
And depending on the job that you do will also vary in what the response will be, whether they can support you, can't support you, and so on.
Yep.
A lot of places are just small places and they just aren't equipped to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Other businesses feel that they're your issues. It's your mental health. That's your problem.
Yep.
A bit like if you had a physical ailment of some sort, that would be your problem as well.
Well, not so much. So say I come into work and my right arm got chopped off. A workplace is going to find ways to work around that.
To a certain degree, to as much as they possibly can within the scope of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a juggler, then that's going to be a lot harder. But if you're just working,
or more impressive,
it would be really impressive.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. They might use their feet, they might use the rest of their body. I want to see that.
It actually would be kind of cool.
I feel like there's some Googling coming on after this podcast today. But anyway, I think because we're talking about your mental health doesn't define you.
Yeah. And this is an interesting thing because how do you go into a workplace and say, I'm a conscientious worker, I will be one of the best workers you've ever had, but at times I'll be almost impossible to live with?
I just don't know if that's when you say you're impossible to live with, then what do you want them to do?
Well, but that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you come out and say that. What I'm saying is that as soon as I say that I live with mental illness, that's the thought that's going to be stuck in somebody's head. It's going to be, okay, at times they're going to be impossible to deal with.
Yes, that is true.
Okay, well,
both in the mindset and in reality, sometimes they simply might be really, really difficult to work with, and that has been the situation for me. And I'm an active carer, so I actually know some things.
Yeah.
In that capacity, but it can still make it very, very hard at the end of the day. And someone like me who has 3 people in my household with mental health issues, and then I go to work with people with mental health issues, it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a lot. Now, I don't think that anyone's mental health defines who they are as a person.
Yep.
I think it can change you as a person, absolutely, 100%, and it can remake you think about what's important and what you want, but it doesn't define you ultimately. You're still you, but perhaps a different part of you or a different way in which you want to live your life and do things.
Yeah, because I completely didn't expect this to go down the work route. I thought it would be a different thing, but it's really emblematic, and it kind of shows the problem of letting people know you have a mental illness. I was about to say then, identifying that you have a mental illness and it not defining you. It would be nice if, see, because we know that finding work for me is a struggle for a number of issues at the moment. And finding a job would just be impossible for a number of reasons at the moment. But we're trying to find jobs that I would be suitable for. We're trying to find avenues that I can go down that will facilitate my being able to work and live with my mental illness.
Yeah, but that said, we've also gone through that road of looking at saying, what can I do and what can't I do with my mental illness in mind?
Yeah.
But more importantly, so that's one aspect of it, but just one. More importantly, we're looking at what skills you have, what can you bring,
What can you do?
and how many hours you could actually do well and be present without it affecting your mental health.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more in that than just what we're saying.
And what the difficulty when it comes to identity with this is so much of what you just mentioned means identity to me. I can't do this. I can do this. It seems like I'm putting myself in a corner.
Or are you just redefining how you operate and how you do things? Still doesn't define you.
Yeah.
Yes, it is identifying, but it's identifying certain limitations perhaps that people have with their mental health. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing saying that you have limitations in what you can and can't do. Because then you are going out to employers or friends or family or anyone and putting around the parameters in order for you to succeed, in order for you to have a win for that day. Because we talked a lot about that in your therapy about wins.
Yeah. What does a win look
What
like?
does a win look like? And not being so hard on yourself about that as well. And I think this is the same. So can't call it defining. We just call it identifying where some limitations might be. And that's not a fail. And that's not a fail for anyone listening to this. It's just being mindful of the fact of what you can and can't do. And there's nothing wrong. Even people who don't have mental health issues have limitations. I have limitations. I don't have a mental health issue, but that's not bad. I'm okay with it. And I think it's good for people with mental health not to keep putting themselves down in the fact that they have limitations, because it doesn't define you. Just embrace it and understand to live with those limitations, because there's plenty of other things that you have going for you rather than just limitations. Is that good? You've gone quiet.
No, it is. It's actually the problem that I've got now is that I love what you're saying and it's fantastic. But the trap that I'm going to get caught in is I'm now going to look at those things, those identifiers, those it's the problem with English semantics, isn't it? Identifier had a different word. So if you understand your limitations, but you don't let them define you. So it's understanding versus identification, as in this is who I am.
This is part of who I am.
I wonder if we're now falling into the man-woman trap where men identify by what they do and women identify by who they are. It's just a male-female difference. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying maybe that's where my mental block comes, because I don't identify as a person with mental illness. I don't see myself, well, I see myself as being broken.
I would agree with that statement. That's how you see it. It's not how I see you.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this is not going at all the way that I thought it would. This is great discussion to have before I do the podcast tomorrow, because you made me think about it in a whole different level. Because it's easy to say to someone, don't let your mental illness define you. You are not your mental illness. It sounds empowering. It sounds cool. It sounds like you're an advocate. I'm on your side. You aren't your mental illness. What if you're my employer and you need to get work done? What if you're my friend and you might want me to look after their kids at some stage, but maybe they wouldn't get you to look after their kids because they're afraid of what you might do or say or what might happen. Man, this is a rabbit hole that I just was not expecting.
I think it can be. Think that there's a lot of unfairness for people out there with mental health issues, because even their own friends and family can define them and who they are based on the fact that they may have had a mental health crisis or that they have ongoing issues, despite the fact that they may have actually worked very, very hard to have a life and redefine what that life looks like.
You know who I've always been impressed with?
Me.
Well, yeah, of course. But someone that impressed me, that really surprised me, was your mum. She never really understood the difficulties that I was having because we weren't together. We weren't with them. We weren't close to them. And she said once that I showed up at the door and they saw for the first time my mental illness.
Mm.
And it's like a light switched on in her head. And somehow I'd given her a window into what I was feeling living with.
Yes.
But she never seemed, to my eyes, to judge me for that. It was never, I've never felt like she looks at me differently than she did before I had clearly shown her somehow what my mental illness looked like.
No, she doesn't. But she'll always never completely understand, because she hasn't experienced it herself. Why is it a limitation? Why can't you just be happy? That's where she would be coming from.
But not in an accusatory fashion.
No, because she would be thinking, you've got so much to live for. Why are you so sad?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, I'm pleased to be able to say that about my mother-in-law. She's never seen me as anything else than just a giant disappointment as a son-in-law. My mental illness didn't. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was a joke. Look, she's never treated me any different or poorly because I've got a mental illness. I've never felt less than in her eyes because of my mental illness.
I don't think people need to really understand all the ins and outs. They just need to appreciate what people can and can't do within certain situations. And I think employers need to embrace that more and tailor jobs to suit what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
And maybe that might look like, if they can do their job and they can do it well, but perhaps when they're having days where their mental health is worse, could they work from home? Could they work in a private office for the day or something like that, so that they're not crowded and surrounded by people who they can't deal with? I'm talking about adaptation rather than saying that it's just easier to get rid of them because they're too much of a bother.
Yeah. I mean, if the pandemic's taught us anything, is just about any job can be done from home. That's not service related. Like you can't be a waiter at home.
Mind you, drones are a thing now, and we have drone drop-offs in our street every day.
Yeah, but like the actual job of being a waiter is one of those jobs that's kind of there's no way that you can wait from home.
Yes.
Um,
I do think there needs to be more avenues for people with mental health as they start identifying what their strengths and weaknesses are, that then they can find something meaningful that they can put themselves into, which will
yeah.
only help their mental health.
Yep.
And still get paid, they can get money, but it's helping them to be able to have a productive life.
We talked about the job that I thought was the best job in the world that I lost, completely devastated. You actually said something, and I want to go back to it because I just can't get it out of my head. What do you think I did wrong in that situation? How do you think I contributed to them not understanding what I was going through?
I don't think that you're in the mindset to be able to do it,
Mhm.
but I think that there needed to be some way in which you could have communicated what was going on in the situation. And I think sometimes you needed to have the ability to pull yourself away and not be having meetings or talking to people when you weren't in a good place with your mental health to be able to have those discussions in the first place.
Mm.
And all they then became was a trigger. So I think about that time and I sort of put the blame across the fact that there was no understanding on their part, nor did they want to. And the fact that you weren't able to vocalize and tell them what was going on.
Mm.
And all it essentially did was just cascade into a bigger issue,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Well, I know they turned around and said that I was being a bully, which was so tragic. It's such a tragic misunderstanding of my reactions to them.
And I think that a lot of people with mental health do get classified as being bullies, being mean, unfair, unreasonable, all of these things, because that's what the illness does, is it brings out the worst parts of themselves when they are truly, truly suffering.
Uh,
But still doesn't define who you are as a person
yeah.
at any point.
It's a difficult, it's a, not difficult, it's an interesting thing because I was at a school the other week and I was doing a presentation about living with mental illness, and I did my presentation. And then one of the guys at MEACT, um, should I say
The
his name?
organisation.
Yeah,
So just one of the guys who works there.
yeah, one of the paid employees, because I'm a volunteer. One of the guys that's nominally looks after me. I always call him my boss when we're at schools. So I say to the kids, my boss is here. So you've got to be really nice to me so I look good.
Mm.
But I know he would never see himself as a boss. Anyway, I finished my talk and he said, it, it was, he said to the kids, because I gave him the last 10 minutes just to wrap things up. And he said, does anybody see Mark as being weak or pathetic or whatever after he'd spoken? And it was a year 12 class.
Mm.
Um, and got to tell you, never been more impressed with a group of kids in my life. In fact, I'm gonna give them a shout out because they were so good. It was the kids at St Edmunds College in Canberra, the year 12 class that I spoke to. Genuinely engaged. Even when they got bored, you could see that they were trying to look interested. And a couple of the kids came up to me afterwards and shook my hand and thanked me for coming in.
Very nice.
But it was really interesting in that moment because I know that none of those kids did think I was weak. And the teacher in the class, his name escapes me, was very, very kind in his description of me, talking about my courage and my willingness to share about this stuff. Will those kids in future be able to keep seeing people like that? Like seeing somebody that's got a mental illness and has the courage to say, I have a mental illness, and for the people to see it to be the same as perhaps and no disrespect to anybody, but being like in a wheelchair. When somebody's in a wheelchair, you know that you're going to have to adapt how you interact with them. You want it to be, you want them to have as easy access as they possibly can. You want their lives to be as easy as they can, and you want to do whatever you can to accommodate the the difficulties that they face. Will those kids be able to build a world where saying you've got a mental illness is more like that? Is more like just saying, okay, yeah, you have a difficulty, you have something that you have to struggle through, but I don't define you as being a wheelchairy.
Mm. I think eventually we will.
Yep.
I said something to someone who I work with and I highly respect. We're actually talking about COVID.
Mm.
And I said to them that I don't believe that COVID's the pandemic. I believe that mental health is the pandemic because more and more we're seeing daily of kids and adults alike who are all having issues
Yeah.
and needing help. And there's more demand on psychologists and therapists alike because they're needed more nowadays.
Yeah.
And I think that it will become more normal and something which is more easily discussed because there'll just be everyone will be suffering at some degree.
What did your friend think, the person that you highly respected?
She kind of went quiet and she said, "Sadly, I think that's a true statement.
Yeah.
That's now the new pandemic is mental health."
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I think that's what you, yeah, because there's going to be debates for the next 100 years about whether people overreacted during COVID. And then there's going to be the people that say, yes, the whole world shouldn't have shut down because everybody got COVID in the end anyway. And then there's going to be people that'll say we saved millions of lives, so why wouldn't a great society do that? Basically shut itself down to save the most vulnerable people. But whether that was the right thing to do, to shut the world down.
I just don't think of it in terms like that. We make decisions based on what we can see in front of us and what we know at the time. And that's really all you can decide to do. And within certain moments, it seemed like we were going to have a mass wipeout of human beings.
Yeah,
And that's how it looked.
yeah,
And people made decisions based on that.
yeah,
But I also think that from here, people will understand more about mental health
yeah.
and it won't be that thing that you need to hide because it'll just be a part of who you are
And
and part of society.
it's interesting, two thoughts, because when the Walking Dead virus comes, I think we're all screwed.
I'm totally okay with it because I've got skills. I've got skills and I can survive the zombie apocalypse.
Okay. The other thing, what you said about mental illness being the new pandemic, I do agree with that. The thing that I don't understand, and it's outside of my field of understanding, is people that get over a mental illness, people that have short-term mental health issues. Uh, it's something like, I know that my mental illness is a life sentence, and I have come to terms with that. But it's how I see everybody's mental illness. They must all stay there. But it is curable in people. People do recover from a mental illness episode. It's and that's the thing, I think, when it comes to mental illness that we can probably help, is if mental illness just becomes normalized, quote unquote, people that have a mental illness that is short term will not exacerbate their symptoms by succumbing to the stigma. They won't say, oh, I don't want to tell anybody I've got a mental illness. So they won't get help they won't get fixed. And what becomes a short-term mental illness then becomes a much bigger struggle because you didn't deal with it.
See, I would argue the point, do people ever really get cured, or do people just learn how to manage what might not be considered as severe depression or severe anxiety better, and not putting themselves in situations where it's exacerbated? That's what I would say.
Okay.
If you're susceptible to it, so let's just say something's happened, you've become clinically depressed,
Yep.
or suffering from extreme anxiety because of a situation that's happened. I don't necessarily believe everyone, or that you can necessarily be cured of that circumstance, because if it was caused by trauma, there's always still going to be
The
that
residue.
trauma in your life. It then becomes on how have you dealt with the situation to be able to get back to where you would like to be
Okay.
as best as you can, and then maintaining, knowing how it works in your life so that you can lead your life the best that you can.
Hmm.
And just looking out for things. Unlike someone who suffers from severe mental illness, they would be able to see when they're starting to be impacted again, perhaps sooner, act on it sooner, and put strategies into place or things into place so that they can get back to where they were. I don't really believe in this cure of mental illness for anyone, whether they have something mild or whether they have something severe. I just think they're all sufferers, but some people are able to deal with theirs better than other people.
Okay. Let me give you a practical example. If you've listened to our podcast much, you know that I have complex PTSD, got it from working in a very violent industry. One of my brothers has PTSD from service in the military, and my other brother has PTSD, but it was from a street fight. He was jumped by a couple of people in a street in Melbourne. He had strong symptoms, but they were able to be dealt with.
But I
So,
don't believe he's cured.
but he doesn't. So, if the conditions are right, you think he's still susceptible to
Yes,
those
absolutely.
symptoms coming back.
Absolutely.
So, even though he's not living with a day to day struggle with it, he's still got to be wise, say, in the places that he goes. He's got to be,
That's right.
okay, all right, interesting. Interesting.
But back to our topic, he's still the person who he is. He just has this extra thing that he needs to be mindful of in his life, just like you need to be mindful of your mental health. But as you said, you're still Mark, you're still you, and your mental health doesn't define me. I don't have a mental health issue, but I support you. Have I sometimes felt like it is our life and it is me? Absolutely. I have felt that way. But I'm still who I am and you're still you.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So I think we're going to conclude it there. Does anybody have any thoughts? Does anybody want to guest in from wisdom? Does anybody have anything that they feel like they want to contribute? If you don't, that's fine. It's no problem. We encourage you to check out our podcast. We're on all the social medias. Just STP Shattered the Podcast. This edition of Marriage and Mental Illness is a part of Shattered the Podcast. It's just a show that my wife and I do on a weekly basis. You're very, very happy for you to jump in on all the socials if you have a question on your well, I guess we're most active on Instagram and Facebook and
Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
yes, YouTube as well. So
YouTube, we put the videos up on there because we
yeah.
actually video this podcast for people listening on Wisdom right now. And
So-
don't forget to listen out for Mark's podcast on Monday. It'll actually be covering a similar topic. your mental illness does not define you, but talking more directly to people with mental health issues. And of course, through the week, jump onto Insta and check out my 30-second moments that I pop up.
Oh, yeah, they've been awesome.
I've got one that's coming up of duckies. You can't miss out on that one. And I've got some rain on water, which is really great moment of mindfulness if you want to get into that.
That's on Instagram.
That's particularly on Instagram. Yes, it is. I do occasionally post on Facebook as well. If you have any comments, please get onto our socials and make a comment. Let us know what you think. Ask questions. Give us some topics you want us to talk about. We're happy to do it. And while you're there, subscribe, like, and share. Do that stuff. That'd be great.
All right. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a great week. We will speak to you again next week. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Shattered, the podcast. I'd like to thank our producer, Meredith Brosnan, our executive producer, Torian Lau, and the band Adelaide for allowing us to use their song as our theme. Go to shatteredthepodcast.com for more information.
Thanks, everyone. Subscribe, like, and share.